My husband grabbed the cruise ship's microphone and announced to 800 passengers that he was renewing his vows to his true wife. Then he walked to my sister, waiting in a wedding dress, while everyone filmed us. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The Mediterranean sun was setting behind us, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that should have been romantic. Instead, I stood frozen in the middle of the ship's grand ballroom, my champagne glass slipping from my trembling fingers as it shattered against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo forever, but nobody noticed. Every single person in that room had their phone pointed at me, recording the exact moment my world collapsed. My husband of 42 years stood at the microphone, his face glowing with a satisfaction I'd never seen before, not even on our actual wedding day. My name is Margaret Harrison, and at 67 years old, I thought I had lived through all of life's major surprises. I was wrong. Standing in that ballroom wearing the new coral dress I'd bought specifically for our anniversary celebration, I became a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. But to understand how I ended up there, watching my husband walk toward my sister in a wedding dress while hundreds of strangers documented my humiliation, you need to know who I really was before that moment. I spent 35 years as an elementary school teacher in Grand Rapids, Michigan, shaping young minds and wiping tears and celebrating small victories like successfully tied shoelaces and conquered multiplication tables. Teaching wasn't just my job, it was my calling. I could have become a principal numerous times, could have moved into administration where the pay was better and the hours were shorter, but I turned down every opportunity. Why? Because Jack needed me to be flexible. His construction business was always just one big contract away from making it big, and he needed a wife who could handle everything at home while he built his empire. I was the woman who woke up at 5:30 every morning to pack lunches for our 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer. I was the one who sat through every Little League game, every dance recital, every parent-teacher conference, usually alone because Jack was working late again. When his father died suddenly of a heart attack, I was the one who held Jack through the nights when he couldn't sleep, haunted by all the conversations they'd never had. When the business nearly went bankrupt in 2008, I was the one who went back to tutoring privately in the evenings, adding 4 hours to my already full days to keep us afloat. My mother used to say I had a servant's heart, and she meant it as a compliment. I took pride in being the foundation everyone could build upon. When my sister Linda's marriage fell apart 3 years ago, I was the first person she called sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. I drove 3 hours to Detroit that very night, helped her pack her things, and brought her back to stay in our guest room for 6 months while she rebuilt her life. I held her through the depression, the anger, the nights when she said she'd never trust anyone again. I introduced her to my friends, included her in every family gathering, made sure she knew she was loved and valued. Jack and I had built what everyone called a beautiful life together. Our house, a colonial in the suburbs with black shutters and a red door, was where everyone gathered for holidays. My dining room table, an antique oak piece we'd bought at an estate sale during our first year of marriage, had hosted hundreds of family dinners. The backyard I'd transformed from a patch of dirt into a garden oasis was where we'd celebrated graduations, birthdays, and just last summer, our grandson's first birthday. Every rose bush, every perennial, every carefully chosen stone in the garden path represented a year of our marriage, a season of growth I'd nurtured with my own hands. The cruise was supposed to be our victory lap. After 42 years of sacrifice, struggle, and success, we were finally going to celebrate us. Jack had retired from day-to-day operations at his company 6 months earlier, promoting his longtime foreman to general manager. We'd talked about this Mediterranean cruise for 20 years, always pushing it off for something more practical, more necessary. But when I found the deal online, 15 days through Greece, Italy, and Spain, I booked it immediately with money from my mother's estate, surprising Jack for our anniversary. I was the woman everyone called when they needed something, the woman who never said no, the woman who believed that love meant sacrifice and that family meant everything. Standing in that ballroom, I was about to learn that sometimes the people you sacrifice everything for are the very ones sharpening the knife for your back. My mornings had a rhythm that I cherished, a peaceful routine carved out over decades of early wake-ups for school. Even in retirement, my internal clock still stirred me at 6, just as the first light touched the bedroom curtains. I'd slip out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Jack, though he could sleep through a thunderstorm. My feet would find my slippers in the dark, and I'd pad downstairs to the kitchen, where my coffee maker was already programmed to have a fresh pot waiting. That kitchen was my sanctuary. Soft yellow walls that I'd painted myself one weekend when Jack was away on business. White cabinets we'd refurbished instead of replacing to save money, and the bay window that looked out onto my garden. I'd sit at the small breakfast nook with my coffee in the mug Jennifer had made for me in her college ceramics class, the one with "World's Best Mom" painted in slightly crooked letters. Those quiet moments, watching the Cardinals and Blue Jays visit the feeder Jack had installed for my birthday, were when I felt most at peace. By 7, Jack would lumber downstairs, his hair sticking up at odd angles, grumbling good-naturedly about the early hour even though he'd been waking at the same time for 40 years. I'd have his breakfast ready, 2 eggs over easy, whole wheat toast, and turkey bacon since his doctor had warned him about his cholesterol. We'd sit together, reading different sections of the newspaper, occasionally sharing interesting tidbits. He'd always kiss my forehead before heading out, a quick gesture that had become as automatic as breathing, saying, "Love you, Maggie," as he grabbed his truck keys. Our days had taken on a comfortable predictability since Jack had stepped back from the business. He'd still go to the office 3 days a week, unable to fully let go of the company he'd built from nothing. On those days, I'd tend to my garden, volunteer at the literacy center downtown, or meet friends for lunch at the small cafe on Monroe Street where they knew my order by heart. Greek salad dressing on the side, extra olives, and a cup of their tomato basil soup. Tuesday afternoons were reserved for grocery shopping, a task I'd turned into an art form over the years. I knew exactly which aisles to hit first, which cashiers were fastest, and how to organize my coupons for maximum savings. The money saved went into what I called my surprise fund, used for unexpected gifts for the grandkids or treating Jack to dinner at his favorite steakhouse. Thursday mornings meant water aerobics at the community center with my group of retired teachers, all of us fighting the good fight against aging joints and expanding waistlines while gossiping about our families. But Sundays were sacred. The house would fill with the aroma of pot roast or lasagna by noon, preparation for the weekly family dinner that had become our tradition. Sarah would arrive first with her twins, 8-year-old boys who'd burst through the door and head straight for the cookie jar I kept stocked just for them. Michael and his wife would follow, usually bringing a dessert they'd picked up from the bakery, though I always had a backup pie just in case. Jennifer, our youngest, would come straight from her shift at the hospital, still in scrubs, exhausted but never missing our gatherings. Lately, Linda had been joining us too. After her divorce was finalized, she'd seemed so lost, so broken. I'd insisted she come for Sunday dinners, knowing that family and routine could heal wounds that time alone couldn't touch. She'd started arriving early to help me cook, chopping vegetables while I seasoned the meat, both of us working in comfortable synchronization. Jack had been so kind to her, treating her like the sister he'd never had, often offering to fix things at her new apartment or helping her understand the financial documents from her divorce. The dining room would come alive with conversation, multiple discussions overlapping as the kids talked about school. The adults debated current events, and everyone competed to tell the funniest story of the week. Jack would sit at the head of the table, carving the roast with the electric knife we'd received as a wedding gift that somehow still worked perfectly. I'd watch from my seat, seeing our life's work in the faces around that table, feeling rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. After dinner, while the women cleaned up, Jack would take the grandkids to the basement to play pool or to the backyard to throw a football. I'd hear their laughter through the kitchen window, a sound that made every sacrifice, every hard year, every moment of doubt worth it. Linda would often stay late, helping me put away leftovers in containers labeled for each family to take home, ensuring everyone had lunches for the week ahead. These Sundays felt like the reward for a life well lived, surrounded by the people we loved most, in the home we'd built together, celebrating nothing more than the blessing of being together. 3 weeks before the cruise, something shifted in the air of our home, like the subtle change in pressure before a storm. It started on a Tuesday night. I was sitting in bed reading the latest book club selection when Jack's phone buzzed on his nightstand. Then again, and again. The screen lit up the dark room like a tiny lighthouse, persistent and impossible to ignore. Jack, who was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, rushed out with toothpaste still at the corner of his mouth and grabbed the phone, flipping it face down quickly. "Work emails," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Tom's having issues with the Riverside project permits." But Tom, his foreman who'd taken over most operations, usually handled permits without bothering Jack. And since when did permit issues require urgent responses at 10:30 at night? I watched Jack's jaw tighten as he stared at the darkened phone, clearly wanting to check it but not while I was watching. He climbed into bed, kissed my cheek, and turned off his lamp, but I could feel the tension radiating from his side of the bed. 20 minutes later, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him slip out of bed and take his phone to the bathroom. The soft glow of light under the door lasted for nearly an hour. The next morning, I found myself doing something I'd never done in 42 years of marriage. I looked at our phone bill online. Jack had always handled the bills, but I knew the passwords. The number of texts had tripled in the last month. Most were to a number I didn't recognize, often sent late at night or early in the morning. My stomach turned slightly, but I closed the laptop, ashamed of my suspicion. This was Jack, my Jack. The man who'd held my hair back through morning sickness, who'd cried at our children's weddings, who still called me his beautiful bride when introducing me to new people. That Thursday, I was folding laundry when I found Linda's scarf in Jack's truck. Not just any scarf, but the silk Hermes, one her ex-husband had given her for their anniversary, the one she'd told me she couldn't bear to throw away despite everything. It was tucked between the seats, as if hidden or forgotten. When Jack came home, I held it up casually. "Oh, Linda left this in your truck?" Jack was pulling off his work boots, and his hands paused for just a moment. "Yeah, her car's been acting up. That grinding noise got worse, so I drove her to the grocery store yesterday. Didn't want her breaking down on 8 Mile. It made perfect sense. Jack had always been helpful, especially to family, but something about the way he immediately launched into a detailed explanation of Linda's car. Troubles felt rehearsed. Too many details too quickly offered. And hadn't Linda mentioned just last Sunday that she'd gotten her car fixed the week before? I folded the scarf carefully, planning to return it at Sunday dinner, and tried to ignore the cold fingers of doubt creeping up my spine. The following week brought more small oddities. Jack, who'd worn the same cologne for 30 years, suddenly had a new bottle of something expensive on his dresser. When I asked about it, he said the guys at work had been teasing him about smelling like an old man, so he'd decided to try something new. But since when did Jack care what anyone thought about how he smelled? This was a man who'd worn the same style of jeans since the 80s. Then there were the gym sessions. Jack announced he was joining the fitness center near his office. Said his doctor had been on him about getting more exercise. I was thrilled, even offered to join him. Maybe we could work out together like those cute elderly couples I saw power walking at the mall. But he quickly explained the gym was for contractors and construction workers, that I'd feel out of place. He'd go early, before work, showering there to save time. 3 mornings a week, he'd leave the house at 5:30 in his gym clothes, returning home in the evening mentioning how sore he was from the workout. But one morning, I woke early with a headache and went to get ibuprofen from his truck's glove compartment, where he always kept a bottle. His gym bag was in the back seat, and curiosity got the better of me. The workout clothes inside were neatly folded, completely dry, without any trace of the musty smell that always clung to gym clothes. My hand shook as I closed the bag, my mind racing with explanations. Maybe he kept extra clothes. Maybe he'd skipped the gym that day. Maybe I was becoming one of those paranoid wives who saw affairs where there were none. The doubt was eating at me like acid, but I pushed it down, focused on the cruise preparations instead. Whatever was happening, surely a romantic getaway would fix it. We just needed time together, away from work stress and daily routines. The Mediterranean sun would burn away these shadows of suspicion. I became an expert at explaining away the unexplainable, a master class in self-deception. Standing in my bathroom mirror each morning, I'd practice my smile while listing rational explanations for everything that felt wrong. Jack was adjusting to semi-retirement, I told myself. Men his age often went through changes, trying to reclaim some youth before it was too late. The gym membership, the cologne, the new attention to his appearance. Wasn't this what all the magazines said about healthy aging? I should be grateful he was taking care of himself instead of letting himself go like so many husbands did after retirement. When Sarah called one afternoon asking if everything was okay with Dad, saying he seemed distracted at Sunday dinner, I laughed it off with practiced ease. "Your father's just restless, honey. You know how he is, can't fully let go of the business. He'll settle into retirement eventually." The lie came so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. Sarah seemed satisfied, and I hung up feeling like I'd protected something precious, though I couldn't quite name what I was protecting anymore. Linda's increased presence in our lives seemed like a blessing I should embrace, not question. My poor sister had been through hell with her divorce. Richard had left her for a woman half his age, the cliché burning her deeper than any unique betrayal could have. She needed family support, needed to feel valued again. When she started asking about Jack's favorite recipes, I was touched by her thoughtfulness. She wanted to contribute to our family dinners, to feel useful. I spent an entire afternoon teaching her how to make Jack's mother's famous pot roast, the one with the secret ingredient of coffee in the gravy that Jack loved so much. "You're such a good wife, Maggie," Linda had said that day, watching me prep the vegetables. "Jack's lucky to have you. Some men don't realize what they have until it's gone." I'd hugged her then, interpreting her words as reflection on her own failed marriage, not seeing the warning she might have been trying to give me, or perhaps the guilt she was attempting to assuage. But I couldn't see it then, wouldn't let myself see it. The mind has an amazing ability to protect itself from truths too painful to acknowledge. The credit card statements I'd been checking showed more unusual charges, but I constructed elaborate justifications for each one. The dinner at the French restaurant downtown? Probably a client meeting. Jack always said fancy restaurants impressed potential contractors. The charges at Nordstrom? Christmas was only a few months away. He was probably getting an early start on shopping. Jack was notorious for last-minute gift panic. The hotel charge in Birmingham, only 40 minutes from our house? Maybe he'd had too much to drink at a business dinner and made the responsible choice not to drive home. My friends at water aerobics noticed I seemed tired, distracted. Betty, who'd gone through her own husband's affair 10 years earlier, gave me long looks over coffee after class. "Maggie, honey, if you ever need to talk," she'd said one Thursday, her hand covering mine. I'd pulled away, laughing too brightly. "Just busy with cruise planning. You know how stressful vacations can be." The concern in her eyes made me avoid water aerobics for the next 2 weeks, claiming a twisted ankle that didn't exist. I threw myself into preparing for the cruise with an intensity that bordered on manic. I bought guidebooks for every port, planned excursions, researched restaurants. I bought new clothes, not just the coral dress for formal night, but casual sundresses, comfortable walking shoes, a new swimsuit that held everything in place while still being flattering. If I looked better, if I was the perfect travel companion, if I could recapture the magic of our early years, everything would return to normal. At night, lying next to Jack, who now seemed to fall asleep the moment his head hit the pillow, no longer reaching for me in the darkness like he used to. I'd stare at the ceiling and list all the evidence of our solid marriage. 42 years together, 3 successful children, a beautiful home, a shared history that included deaths and births, failures and triumphs, thousands of nights in this same bed. Whatever was happening now was just a phase, a bump in the road of a long marriage. Everyone said marriage took work. This was just the work part. The night before we left for the cruise, Jack was packing his suitcase while I sat on the bed, folding his shirts. He seemed lighter somehow, almost giddy with excitement. "This is going to be a trip to remember, Maggie," he said, smiling at me with what looked like genuine affection. "Everything's going to change after this cruise." I smiled back, feeling relief wash over me. See? He was excited about us, about our anniversary trip. I'd been paranoid over nothing. As I helped him pack his new cologne, I pushed down one last flutter of doubt. Change was good. Change meant growth, renewal, a new chapter in our love story. I had no idea how prophetic his words would prove to be. The morning before our cruise departure, I was in full preparation mode, the kind of organized chaos that preceded any big trip. Jack had gone to his office to tie up loose ends, and I was home doing the final packing. I needed his passport from his desk drawer, the mahogany monster he'd inherited from his father that dominated our home office. The thing had a dozen drawers, and Jack's organizational system was mysterious at best. As I pulled open the third drawer on the right, searching behind old tax returns and warranty papers, my fingers found something that shouldn't have been there. A credit card statement folded into a tight square and shoved to the very back of the drawer, behind a stack of old business cards. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. This wasn't from our joint accounts. This was a Visa card I didn't know existed in Jack's name only, with a billing address listed as his office. The statement was from last month, and as my eyes traveled down the charges, each one felt like a small cut. There was a charge for $2,847 at Tiffany & Co. on September 15th. I remembered that day clearly because Jack had said he was visiting a construction site in Detroit. The receipt showed the purchase was made at Somerset Collection in Troy, an upscale mall in the opposite direction. Another charge, Le Bernardin Restaurant, $436, on a night when Jack had texted me that he was grabbing burgers with Tom after a late meeting. The restaurant was one I'd mentioned wanting to try for our anniversary. He'd taken someone else there first. My legs felt weak, and I sat down hard in Jack's leather desk chair. There were more charges. A boutique hotel in Ann Arbor, 2 nights totaling $890. The dates matched a weekend when Jack had supposedly gone fishing with his brother in northern Michigan. I'd even packed his fishing gear, made sandwiches for the cooler. His brother had probably covered for him. The betrayal felt like it was spreading, infecting every relationship, every memory. The most damaging charge was at the bottom: Chapel of the Bells, wedding services, $500. The date was 6 months ago. My mind refused to process what this meant. People didn't just accidentally charge wedding services. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a business expense. This was deliberate, planned, executed while I was probably at home, making his dinner or tending my garden. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers and took pictures of every charge, every page. Then I went to our joint accounts online, something Jack usually handled. I knew the passwords because Jack, creature of habit that he was, used the same one for everything. Our anniversary date followed by his mother's birth year. The main checking account looked normal at first, but our savings account told a different story. Over the last 8 months, there had been systematic withdrawals, each one just under $5,000, the amount that wouldn't trigger bank reporting. Nearly $30,000 was gone, transferred to an account number I didn't recognize. I sat at that desk for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my mind racing through possibilities. Was he being blackmailed? Did he have a gambling problem I didn't know about? But the wedding services charge kept blinking in my mind like a neon sign. You don't get blackmailed into wedding services. You choose that. The sound of the front door opening startled me back to reality. I quickly refolded the statement, shoved it back where I'd found it, and grabbed Jack's passport from the top drawer where it had been sitting in plain sight all along. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he'd hear it from downstairs. "Maggie, you about ready? We need to leave for the airport in 2 hours." Jack's voice carried up the stairs, cheerful and normal, as if he hadn't been systematically dismantling our life in secret. "Just finishing up," I called back, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. I walked to our bedroom and sat on the bed, passport in hand, trying to decide what to do. Confront him now? Wait until after the cruise? Pretend I'd never seen anything? The cruise was paid for, non-refundable. My mother's money, I realized with a fresh wave of nausea. I'd used my inheritance from my mother to pay for a celebration of a marriage that was already dead. I heard Jack's footsteps on the stairs and made a split-second decision. I would go on this cruise. I would gather more information. I would find out exactly what was happening before I made any moves. As Jack appeared in the doorway, smiling and asking about the passports, I held his up with a smile that felt like broken glass in my mouth. "Got them right here, honey. Everything's ready for our big adventure." He crossed the room and kissed my forehead, the familiar gesture now feeling like a mockery. "You're the best, Maggie. I don't deserve you." For once, I thought, as I continued to smile, we were in complete agreement. The second night of the cruise, the Mediterranean Sea was calm as glass, and the ship's grand ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in ivory linens, and roses adorned every surface. This was the special anniversary dinner I'd booked months ago, an extra fee for what they called the romance package. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me as I sat at our table, watching Jack fidget with his napkin, clearly nervous about something. We were seated with 2 other couples celebrating anniversaries. I was making polite conversation about ports of call when Jack suddenly stood up, tapping his champagne glass with a spoon. The room gradually quieted, and that's when I saw the ship's events coordinator hand him a microphone. My stomach dropped. This wasn't spontaneous. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack's voice boomed through the speakers, and I noticed phones already coming out to record what people assumed would be a romantic gesture. 42 years ago, I made a mistake. The words hit me like ice water. I married the wrong sister. Gasps rippled through the room. My champagne glass slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the floor with a crash that seemed to echo forever. Jack continued, his voice growing stronger, more confident, as if he'd rehearsed this moment. "But 6 months ago, I corrected that mistake. I found my soulmate, my true love, the woman I should have chosen from the beginning." He started walking across the ballroom, and that's when I saw her. Linda, my sister, standing in the doorway wearing a white dress, a wedding dress, holding a bouquet of white roses, the same type of roses from my garden that she'd always admired. The room erupted. Phones appeared from every direction like weapons, all pointed at me. I heard someone say, "Oh my God, are you getting this?" Another voice, "This is going viral for sure." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My daughter Sarah materialized beside me, grabbing my arm, but I couldn't hear what she was saying over the roaring in my ears. Jack reached Linda and took her hand, pulling her to the center of the dance floor. 6 months ago, Linda and I were married in a private ceremony. Tonight, before all of you as witnesses, we're renewing those vows. Because true love deserves to be celebrated, not hidden. Linda looked directly at me then, and there was something in her eyes that looked almost like triumph. She spoke into the microphone Jack handed her. "Margaret, you always said family comes first. Thank you for bringing us together." My son Michael was suddenly there, trying to shield me from the cameras, but it was too late. Someone had already live-streamed it. Later, Sarah would tell me it had gotten 3 million views in the first hour. But in that moment, all I could do was stare at my husband and sister, standing in the middle of the dance floor I'd paid for. surrounded by the roses I'd selected, announcing to the world that I had been living a lie for the last 6 months. Maybe longer. Back in my cabin that night, still in my coral dress, now stained with champagne, I sat numbly as my children revealed what they'd been investigating since dinner. Michael, ever the problem solver, had spent the last 2 hours on his laptop and phone, calling in favors from his law school friends and a private investigator he knew through work. What he discovered made the public humiliation feel like just the tip of a very calculated iceberg. "Mom, Dad's been planning this for over a year," Michael said, showing me documents on his laptop. "The construction company. He restructured it 8 months ago. You're no longer listed as co-owner. He created a new LLC and transferred all the assets there. Your name isn't on any of it." Sarah, who worked in banking, pulled up more information on her phone. "The withdrawals from your joint savings, they weren't random. Look at the pattern. Every withdrawal was made the day after your volunteer shift at the literacy center, when he knew you'd be tired and wouldn't check the accounts immediately. And Mom, there's more. That wedding 6 months ago? It was recorded at the courthouse, but they listed Linda's address in Florida, not Michigan." "Florida?" I whispered, confused. "That's the thing," Michael continued, his face grim. "Florida doesn't recognize tenancy by the entirety. If Dad establishes residency there with Linda, it affects how marital assets are divided. They've been planning to move there after this cruise. There's a condo purchased in Linda's name in Naples, paid for with—" "Mom, I'm sorry, but it was paid for with funds from a home equity loan on your house. He forged your signature." The room spun. Jennifer, my youngest, was crying quietly in the corner. "I found something else," she said, holding up her tablet. "Linda's divorce from Richard? She got almost nothing because she signed a prenup, but there are emails here between her and Dad from 14 months ago. She was asking him about Michigan divorce law, about how to protect assets. This wasn't a love affair that got out of hand. This was planned. They targeted you, Mom." Michael pulled up more documents. "The cruise itself is part of it. Dad thought that serving you with divorce papers in international waters would complicate your ability to respond legally. He's already filed in Florida claiming abandonment because you've been living separately. That's why Linda used a Florida address for the marriage certificate. He's trying to establish that you've been separated for months, making the divorce easier and the asset division favor him." "But that's fraud," Sarah said, her banking expertise showing. "The forged signatures, the hidden transfers, the restructuring of the business without Mom's knowledge as a co-owner. This isn't just a divorce, it's financial abuse and fraud." The full scope of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just my husband falling in love with my sister. This was a systematic dismantling of my life, planned with the precision of one of Jack's construction projects. Every move calculated, every contingency planned for. Except, as Michael pointed out with a grim smile, they hadn't planned on doing this in front of hundreds of witnesses with cameras. They hadn't planned on the captain being informed of potential maritime fraud. And they certainly hadn't planned on my children being as smart and connected as they were. After my children left my cabin at 2 a.m, promising we'd figure everything out together, I finally fell apart. The sobs came from somewhere so deep inside me that my whole body shook with the force of them. I slid from the bed onto the floor, still in that champagne-stained coral dress, and let 42 years of memories crash over me like the waves against the ship's hull. I remembered our wedding day, how Jack's hands had trembled as he placed the ring on my finger. He'd forgotten his vows and had to whisper, "I love you, help me." And I'd whispered them back to him, word by word, until he found his voice. How could the man who needed me to help him speak his love aloud, become someone who announced its death to 800 strangers? The memories wouldn't stop coming. Jack holding our firstborn, Sarah, crying because she was so tiny, he was afraid he'd break her. The night Michael had broken his arm falling from his bike, and Jack had carried him to the car, whispering, "Daddy's got you, buddy. Everything's okay." Jennifer's high school graduation, where Jack had embarrassed her by standing up and cheering when she walked across the stage, shouting, "That's my baby girl." But now those memories felt poisoned. When exactly had he stopped loving me? Was it gradual, like erosion, or sudden, like a light switch? Had he been thinking of Linda last Christmas when we danced to our wedding song in the living room? When I had my cancer scare 5 years ago and he'd held my hand through every chemotherapy treatment, was he already dreaming of freedom? And Linda, God, Linda. I'd given her my mother's pearl necklace after her divorce, the one Mom had said should go to both her girls. I'd held her hair back when she'd gotten food poisoning at Thanksgiving. I'd spent countless hours on the phone telling her she deserved better than Richard, that she was beautiful and worthy of real love. She'd been gathering intelligence, learning my weaknesses, studying my marriage from the inside like a disease studying its host. I crawled to the cabin's small bathroom and caught sight of myself in the mirror. Mascara streaked down my cheeks in black rivers. My carefully styled hair was destroyed. The coral dress that I'd thought made me look elegant was ripped at the zipper from my frantic attempts to get it off. I looked like exactly what I was, a 67-year-old fool who'd been too blind to see what was happening in her own home. The cruelest part was how they'd used my own nature against me. My trust, my loyalty, my instinct to care for others. These weren't virtues. They were vulnerabilities they'd exploited. Every time I'd pushed down suspicion, every time I'd chosen to believe the best about them, I'd been enabling my own destruction. The good wife, the caring sister, these roles I'd taken such pride in had been my downfall. I sat on that bathroom floor until the sun began to rise, painting the ocean in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock the darkness in my chest. 42 years. Half my life. More than half, really, since the first 25 years barely counted as living compared to what came after Jack, or what I'd thought came after Jack. Now I realized I'd been alone for who knows how long, living with strangers who wore the faces of people I loved. At sunrise, I stood on my cabin's small balcony, watching dolphins leap through the ship's wake. They moved with such precision, such purpose, turning what could destroy them, the massive ship's turbulent waters, into their playground. Something about that image shifted something fundamental inside me. I wasn't going to be the woman who got pushed under by the wake. I was going to be the one who learned to navigate it. I walked back inside and looked at myself in the mirror. Yes, I looked destroyed. But underneath the smeared makeup and swollen eyes, I saw something else. The woman who'd survived 23 hours of labor with Sarah. The woman who'd built lesson plans while undergoing chemotherapy. The woman who'd raised 3 successful children while supporting a husband's dreams and teaching hundreds of students to read. That woman was still in there and she was furious. I called Sarah first. Get me the name of the best divorce attorney in Michigan. Not just good. I want the one who makes cheating husbands cry in their sleep. Mom! Sarah sounded startled by the steel in my voice. And call your father's brother. Ask him point blank if he covered for Jack during that supposed fishing trip. Record the call if Michigan law allows it. If not, take detailed notes. I was already making lists in my head, the teacher in me organizing information into action items. Michael, I need that forensic accountant's number, the one your friend used in the Morrison case. Tell them it's urgent and I'll pay emergency rates. Jennifer arrived at my cabin with coffee and a laptop. Mom, you're scaring me. You were catatonic 3 hours ago. I took the coffee and pulled my hair into a tight bun, the same way I used to before parent-teacher conferences with difficult families. Honey, I spent 42 years being Jack Harrison's wife. But before that, I was Margaret Louise Coleman, and that woman didn't take nonsense from anyone. Your father and aunt think they've destroyed me. They're about to learn they've just woken me up. I opened the laptop and began typing an email to my cousin Patricia, who worked for the IRS. Patricia always said something felt off about Jack's business taxes. Time to see if her instincts were right. Then I messaged my former student, Danny Morrison, now a circuit court judge. Danny owes me. I tutored him for free for 3 years when his family couldn't afford help. He wouldn't be a judge without me. Michael walked in as I was creating a spreadsheet. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Cataloging every single asset I can remember, every tool in Jack's garage, every piece of jewelry he's given me that I can prove with photos, every contribution I made to the business, financial and otherwise. 20 years of unpaid bookkeeping. The contracts I helped write because Jack couldn't spell liability without help. The client relationships I maintained at dinner parties. All of it." I stood up, steady for the first time since the previous night. "Your father thinks he married a doormat. He's about to discover he married a dragon who's been sleeping for 42 years. And dragons, my darlings, protect their treasures." The ship had 5 more days at sea. 5 days where Jack and Linda had to face me at every meal, every event, trapped on this floating stage where they'd chosen to perform their cruel theater. They'd wanted an audience. They were about to get more performance than they'd bargained for. The ship's business center became my war room. While Jack and Linda paraded around the deck, playing the part of newlyweds, I was building my case with surgical precision. The IT manager, Roberto, a young man from Portugal who reminded me of my former students, became an unexpected ally after I explained my situation. His own mother had been betrayed similarly, and he was more than willing to help a nice lady get justice. "Mrs. Harrison, your husband used the ship's Wi-Fi to access his email," Roberto said, pulling up logs on his computer. "I cannot show you the emails directly, but if law enforcement or lawyers request these logs, they would show he's been communicating with someone about moving assets while on this ship." I recorded our conversation with Roberto's permission, then contacted the forensic accountant Michael had recommended. Within hours, she'd discovered something explosive. Jack had been using the construction company to launder money for a contractor with mob connections. The FBI had been watching that contractor for 2 years. Jack's financial crimes had just become federal crimes. My daughter Sarah worked her banking connections and found that the Florida condo purchase triggered suspicious activity reports due to the large cash deposits. "Mom, Linda's name is on the deed, but the money came from an offshore account in the Caymans. That's money laundering and tax evasion." I spent Tuesday creating a detailed timeline of Jack's lies, cross-referenced with credit card statements, phone records, and social media posts. Jennifer helped me recover deleted Facebook messages between Jack and Linda going back 18 months. They discussed everything: how to hide money, how to make me look mentally unstable, even discussing putting something in my food to make me seem disoriented during the cruise. They'd planned to have me committed for evaluation upon return, using that to take control of my remaining assets. Wednesday brought the biggest discovery. I befriended Agnes, an elderly widow traveling alone, who turned out to be a retired SEC investigator. Over afternoon tea, she reviewed my documents and made a call to a former colleague. "Your husband's business restructuring violated federal securities regulations. He moved assets from a corporation where you're a registered shareholder without proper notification or board approval. That's securities fraud." I had Jennifer film me giving a detailed statement about finding the wedding certificate charge, the hidden credit cards, and the forged signatures. We filmed it on the deck with the ocean behind me, making sure to capture the date and location. For legal purposes, I explained to curious passengers who'd witnessed the dining room catastrophe. Thursday evening, I orchestrated a meeting with the ship's captain. Under maritime law, the captain had authority to investigate potential crimes committed on his vessel. I presented evidence that Jack had used false pretenses to get me on the ship, intending to serve fraudulent divorce papers in international waters. The captain, a stern Norwegian man named Eric, reviewed everything with his legal officer. "Mrs. Harrison, this appears to be a conspiracy to commit fraud using my ship as the venue. I'll be notifying the authorities at our next port." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "I understand there's a vow renewal ceremony planned for tomorrow night's formal dinner. As captain, I have some discretion over how these ceremonies proceed." I smiled for the first time in days. "Captain Eric, I would be very interested to hear what you have in mind." The ship's final night at sea brought an electric tension that seemed to charge the very air. Word had spread through the vessel like wildfire about the anniversary dinner catastrophe. And now everyone knew there would be a vow renewal ceremony featuring the same dramatic triangle. The ship's photographers were suspiciously present everywhere Jack and Linda went. And I noticed. Several passengers had started a betting pool on what would happen next. The crew members, who'd been nothing but professional, gave me subtle nods of support when I passed. Roberto from IT had apparently shared my story with select staff members, and I'd become something of a folk hero among them. I spent the afternoon preparing with my children, who'd transformed from confused bystanders to fierce protectors. Sarah had connected with 3 passengers who happened to be attorneys, including one who specialized in international maritime law. Michael had been in constant contact with authorities in Michigan, filing emergency injunctions to freeze the assets Jack had been moving. Jennifer, my quiet one, had created a social media campaign that was gaining traction under the hashtag Chenier Cruise Ship Betrayal, though I'd asked her to keep my name out of it for now. "Mom, you look incredible," Sarah said as I emerged from my cabin that evening. I'd chosen to wear white. Not wedding white, but a sharp, powerful winter white pantsuit I'd bought years ago for a school board presentation. My hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and I'd applied my makeup with extra care. If this was to be my public vindication, I would look like the woman I truly was, a survivor, not a victim. The ballroom had been decorated even more elaborately than for the anniversary dinner. The cruise line, perhaps sensing the entertainment value of the drama, had gone all out. Roses everywhere, candlelight, a string quartet playing romantic melodies. They'd even set up a special platform at the front where the vow renewals would take place. I noticed several crew members with video equipment. Apparently, the ship created commemorative videos of these ceremonies. How perfect. Jack and Linda made their entrance fashionably late, clearly intending to build anticipation. Linda wore another white dress, this one even more elaborate than the first, with a train that seemed excessive for a ship's ballroom. Jack was in a new tuxedo, one I'd never seen before, probably purchased with my mother's money. They moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations from passengers who either didn't know the full story or were too polite to show their disgust. Captain Eric stood at the makeshift altar, his dress whites impeccable, his expression unreadable. There were 5 other couples participating in the renewal ceremony, all legitimate anniversaries ranging from 10 to 60 years. I felt sorry that their genuine celebrations would be overshadowed by this spectacle, but several had approached me earlier to express their support. The woman celebrating 60 years had patted my hand and whispered, "Give them hell, dear." As the ceremony began, I positioned myself at a table with perfect sightlines, surrounded by my children and the new allies we'd made during the cruise. Agnes, the retired SEC investigator, sat to my right, having delayed her disembarkation to witness this. Roberto stood, near the audio-visual equipment, having volunteered to help with the technical aspects of the ceremony. The ship's photographer seemed to be taking an unusual number of photos in my direction, catching my calm composure. The first 4 couples renewed their vows beautifully, each declaration of continued love, bringing tears to many eyes. These were real marriages, tested by time and strengthened by trials. The contrast to what would come next was palpable. As the 4th couple kissed to seal their renewed commitment, the captain called forward, "Jack and Linda Harrison." They walked forward, Linda's train carried by a bemused crew member, Jack's chest puffed out with pride. Several phones rose to record, the passengers who'd witnessed the anniversary dinner debacle, eager to capture the next chapter. Jack had a microphone clipped to his lapel. He'd apparently arranged to have his vows amplified for all to hear. Of course he had. The man who'd built his business on my silent support now needed everyone to hear his voice. Captain Eric began speaking, his Norwegian accent lending gravity to his words. Marriage is a partnership built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. It requires both parties to honor not just the letter of their commitment, but its spirit. He paused, looking directly at Jack. Before we proceed with these vows, there are some matters that require clarification. Jack's smile wavered slightly. Linda's grip on his hand visibly tightened. The ballroom fell silent except for the gentle hum of the ship's engines and the distant sound of waves against the hull. This was it, the moment when everything would change. I stood up slowly, my movement drawing every eye in the room, and walked toward the platform with the same measured pace I'd used when approaching difficult parents in parent-teacher conferences. The captain nodded to me, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Mr. Harrison," Captain Eric continued, "I believe Mrs. Margaret Harrison has something that needs to be addressed before we proceed." I stepped onto the platform, my heels clicking against the polished wood with the authority of a judge's gavel. The captain handed me his microphone, and I turned to face the assembled crowd, catching Jack's shocked expression in my peripheral vision. Linda had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Thank you, Captain Eric," I began, my teacher's voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Before these two renew vows they took in secret 6 months ago, I think everyone deserves to know the full story. After all, you've all been made unwitting participants in this performance." Jack lunged for the microphone, but Captain Eric stepped between us. "Mr. Harrison, please allow your wife to speak. Your legal wife, that is, as recognized by the state of Michigan and the United States federal government." I pulled out my phone, connecting it to the ship's audio system with Roberto's help. This is a recording of Jack and Linda from 3 days ago in the casino, unaware they were being filmed by security cameras. Their voices filled the room, discussing how to have me involuntarily committed upon return, how to claim I'd had a mental breakdown on the cruise. The crowd gasped as Linda's voice said clearly, "Once she's in the psychiatric hold, you can get power of attorney. My ex-husband's lawyer knows a judge who'll fast-track it." "That's taken out of context," Linda shrieked, her composed facade cracking. "Context?" I smiled coldly. "Let's discuss context. Captain Eric, would you please share what your investigation revealed about who actually paid for this cruise?" The captain stepped forward. "The cruise was paid for 6 months ago by Mrs. Margaret Harrison, using her personal inheritance. The booking was made as an anniversary gift for her husband. However, Mr. Jack Harrison subsequently added passengers and changed cabin arrangements without Mrs. Harrison's knowledge, moving her to a different deck while upgrading himself and Ms. Linda Coleman to a suite." I continued, my voice growing stronger. "But that's not the most interesting part. Roberto, would you please display the documents on the screen?" The ballroom's large screen, usually used for entertainment, lit up with financial documents. These are the real finances of Harrison Construction. While Jack told me the company was worth $2 million, he'd actually been hiding debts of over $3 million. He's been using my teacher's pension to make minimum payments while moving all liquid assets offshore. The lavish lifestyle he's been living with Linda, funded entirely by my retirement savings and my mother's inheritance. Jack's face had turned purple. "You can't prove any of this. This is defamation." "Actually," Agnes stood up from her table, her voice carrying the authority of decades in law enforcement, "I'm Agnes Thornberry, retired SEC investigator. I've reviewed Mrs. Harrison's documentation. What I've found constitutes federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. I've already contacted my former colleagues. Federal agents will be meeting the ship when we dock tomorrow." The screen changed to show a photograph. Jack and Linda at a jewelry store, dated 6 months ago. "This is them buying wedding rings," I explained to the stunned crowd. with my credit card, which Jack had fraudulently obtained using my social security number. Identity theft is also a federal crime, by the way. Linda tried to run, but her elaborate train tangled around her feet, sending her sprawling onto the platform. As she fell, several documents flew from her purse. Forged power of attorney papers with my signature, dated for tomorrow, the day we were supposed to dock. Captain Eric picked them up, examining them with disgust. Attempting to forge legal documents on my ship is a maritime crime, he announced. Security, please escort Ms. Coleman to the brig. As security officers moved toward Linda, she screamed. It was all Jack's idea. He said Margaret was boring, that she'd never fight back. He promised me half of everything. He said she was too stupid to notice. The crowd erupted. Someone shouted, "This is better than Netflix." Phones were recording from every angle as Linda was escorted out, her white dress train dragging behind her like a surrender flag. Jack stood alone on the platform, his tuxedo now looking like a costume, his confident facade completely shattered. "Margaret, please. We can talk about this privately." Privately? I laughed, and it felt like freedom. You announced your betrayal to 800 strangers. You made our marriage a public spectacle. Now you can publicly face the consequences. Oh, and Jack? That text you sent your lawyer about hiding assets in the Cayman Islands? The FBI Cybercrimes Unit found it very interesting. Two security officers approached Jack. As they led him away, he turned back one more time. "But I loved you once." "No," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You loved what I did for you. There's a difference. And now, everyone knows exactly who you really are." The ballroom exploded in applause. 6 months after the cruise, I stood in the kitchen of my colonial home, the one Jack had tried to steal, preparing Sunday dinner for my family. But everything about this scene was different now. The house was still mine. The forensic accountant had discovered that Jack had never legally been able to mortgage it without my signature, making all his attempts null and void. The FBI's investigation into his money laundering connections had resulted in asset forfeiture of his hidden accounts, which were then awarded to me as the defrauded spouse. The construction company, built on the foundation of my support and sacrifice, was liquidated to pay his debts and fines. After all was said and done, I received a settlement of $1.8 million, including damages for emotional distress and identity theft. Linda faced her own reckoning. The attempted fraud charges, combined with conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, resulted in 18 months in federal prison. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she was serving time in the same facility where her ex-husband's new wife's brother had served time for fraud. Apparently, Linda had a type. Her children, mortified by their mother's actions, reached out to apologize. I told them they weren't responsible for their mother's choices, just as my children weren't responsible for their father's. Jack's fall was even more spectacular. The federal investigation revealed he'd been laundering money for 3 years, skimming from construction projects funded by federal grants. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. The man who'd built his reputation on solid foundations had his own crumble beneath him. His brother, who'd initially covered for him, came forward with additional evidence in exchange for immunity. It turned out Jack had been living a triple life. Beyond Linda, there was another woman in Florida he'd been supporting with my money. The viral video of the cruise confrontation had unexpected consequences. I received a book deal from a major publisher for my story, titled 42 Years and 7 Days, a memoir of betrayal and redemption. The advance alone was more than Jack had ever made in a year. A production company optioned the rights for a limited series with a well-known actress already attached to play me. My lawyer made sure I retained creative control. This was my story to tell, not anyone else's. But the most meaningful changes weren't financial. My children and I had grown closer through the ordeal, our bond strengthened by facing the crisis together. Sarah left her corporate banking job to start a nonprofit helping women navigate financial abuse in divorce. Michael specialized his law practice in fraud protection for elderly victims. Jennifer, inspired by her mother, finally standing up for herself, left her toxic workplace and started her own medical practice. I transformed the house that had been our marital home into something truly mine. Jack's dark office became a bright art studio where I finally pursued the painting I'd abandoned when we married. The basement he dominated with his sports memorabilia became a classroom where I tutored struggling readers for free, returning to my true calling. The garden bloomed more beautifully than ever, as if the roses knew they were finally being tended by hands that were free. My Sunday dinners continued, but now they included new faces. Agnes, the retired SEC investigator, had become a dear friend, joining us regularly with her sharp wit and stories from her career. Roberto, the IT manager from the ship, stayed in touch and visited when his ship docked nearby. Several women who'd reached out after seeing my story, finding themselves in similar situations, became part of an informal support group that met monthly in my living room. The dining room table, that antique oak piece where so many family memories had been made, now hosted different conversations. Instead of pretending everything was perfect, we talked about real things, struggles and triumphs, fears and hopes, the messy, beautiful truth of life. The grandchildren, resilient as children always are, adapted quickly to Grandpa's absence, though we'd explained it in age-appropriate terms. On what would have been our 43rd anniversary, I received a letter from Jack in prison. I burned it unread in the fireplace, using the flames to roast marshmallows with my grandchildren. Linda had tried to contact me, too, but the restraining order I'd obtained prevented any communication. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. As I looked around my table that Sunday, seeing my children laughing, my grandchildren playing, my new chosen family sharing stories, I realized something profound. Jack and Linda hadn't destroyed my life. They'd freed me from a prison I didn't know I was in. At 68, I was more myself than I'd been at 25. The woman who'd stood on that cruise ship platform, reclaiming her narrative in front of 800 witnesses, was the woman I'd always been underneath the roles I'd played. The betrayal that was meant to be my ending had become my beginning. 1 year after that fateful cruise, I stood on a different ship's deck, this time sailing the Norwegian fjords I'd always dreamed of seeing. Jack had refused this trip 3 times over the years, calling it too cold and boring. But here I was, at 68, watching the northern lights dance across the sky, their green ribbons reflecting off the dark water, like nature's own celebration of freedom. I wasn't alone. Sarah and her twins were with me, along with Agnes, who'd become the sister I'd actually chosen rather than the one biology had assigned me. As I stood there, wrapped in a warm coat I'd bought with my own money, making my own choices, I thought about the journey from that horrible night in the Mediterranean to this moment of peace. The cruise that was meant to destroy me had become my liberation story. But more than that, it had become a mirror for thousands of women who reached out with their own stories of betrayal, gaslighting, and financial abuse. The emails still came daily. Women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s, sharing how their husbands had hidden assets, how their families had conspired against them, how they'd been made to feel crazy for suspecting what turned out to be true. But more importantly, they shared their triumphs. The lawyer who finally listened, the judge who saw through the lies, the moment they stood in their own homes knowing they'd won. My story had given them permission to fight back, to stop being the good wife who suffered in silence. Through the book tours and interviews, I'd learned something profound about betrayal. It's not really about the person who betrays you. It's about the person you become in response. Jack and Linda thought they were stealing my future, but they were actually forcing me to finally claim it. Every sacrifice I'd made thinking it was for love had actually been enabling their selfishness. Every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace, I'd been betraying myself. The real crime wasn't that they'd deceived me, it was that I'd been trained from birth to accept less than I deserved and call it love. Greed is a fascinating poison. It doesn't just corrupt the greedy, it blinds them. Jack and Linda were so focused on the money, the assets, the material things, that they couldn't see what they were really destroying, their own humanity. Jack now sat in a federal prison cell, his reputation destroyed, his children ashamed, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale told at dinner parties. Linda lost everything: her freedom, her family's respect, and any chance at real happiness. She'd traded her sister's love for money that was never hers, and ended up with neither. But here's what I learned about truth. It's patient. It can be buried, hidden, twisted, and denied, but it always finds its way to the surface. Those 800 witnesses on the cruise weren't just recording a scandal. They were documenting the moment truth broke free. Every phone camera became a weapon against gaslighting. Every shared video became proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things, wasn't the problem. In trying to publicly humiliate me, Jack and Linda had given me an army of witnesses who made their lies impossible to maintain. The deepest lesson, though, was about starting over. At 67, I thought my story was mostly written. I thought I was in the epilogue of my life, just waiting for the gentle fade to black. But betrayal taught me that you can be the author of your own story at any age. You can tear up the chapters someone else wrote for you and pick up your own pen. Every woman who's been told she's too old to start over, too invested to leave, too deep to dig herself out, that's a lie told by people who benefit from your paralysis. Today, my life is smaller in some ways, but infinitely richer. I have fewer people at my table, but more truth in our conversations. I have less money than Jack promised we'd retire with, but every penny is honestly mine. I have scars from the betrayal, but they've become proof of survival, not marks of victimhood. My garden still blooms, but now I plant what I want, where I want it, without asking anyone's permission. So here's my question to you. What betrayal are you accepting as normal? What lies are you telling yourself to avoid the temporary pain of acknowledging the truth? What sacrifice are you calling love when it's really just being used? And most importantly, what would you do if you knew that 70, 80, even 90 years old isn't too late to become who you really are? Share your story in the comments below. Tell me about the moment you realized you were stronger than you knew. Tell me about the betrayal that became your beginning, or the one you're still gathering courage to confront. Let's build a community of truth tellers, of women and men who refuse to let someone else write their final chapters. Subscribe for more stories of triumph over betrayal, and remember, it's never too late to become the hero of your own story. Your cruise ship moment might be waiting just around the corner, and when it comes, you'll be ready.